if you if you saw that your neighbor was like, hey, come pay 50 cents to beat up a girl, would you be like, yeah, sure? Like, what the fuck? This story is giving me like a brain aneurysm. Like, seriously, like, that's how much of a coward Stephanie's boyfriend was, that he's gonna go bash the girl and not touch the guy because the guy can hit him back. Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. I am so sorry if that was too fast. Basically, it's a disclaimer, and hi, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Thank you for clicking on this video. Today is a very interesting story. It's fucked up, but I guess all my stories that I tell are pretty fucked up. And it does involve child abuse, so trigger warning or content warning. If that's not something you want to hear about, don't watch this one. I do a lot of these. They just keep coming up. Like, it's not my fault, I swear. Gertrude Baniszewski was an American woman with a Dutch background, born 1928. Gertrude was the third of 6 children and she came from a working class family. But at age 11, Gertrude watched her father die from a bad heart attack, and this really had like a pretty bad impact and effect on her because she was relatively close to him, especially in comparison to how close she was with her mother, which was not at all. Then at 16, Gertrude dropped out of high school and she ran off to go marry a guy called John Baniszewski, and he was 18 years old at the time. So John and Gertrude, they got down and dirty pretty quickly and they started popping out babies. They had 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy, Paula, Stephanie, John and Mary. But despite the kids, the marriage, it wasn't really doing so well. John was a very angry man and he would become really violent with Gertrude. He would beat her a lot and abuse her. And he'd also do it in front of the kids as well, so it wasn't a very pleasant home life either for them. Despite all that though, it took her 10 years before she decided she would leave John. So she took the kids and she went on to remarry, this time to a guy called Edward Guthrie. But poor little Edward, he only lasted 3 months before Gertrude was out of there. She kicked him to the curb, and get this, she remarries John, the one that was bashing her. But Gertrude went on to have 2 more children with Johnny Boy, and their names were Shirley and James. And then Gertrude and John, they got divorced again. So that's now 3 divorces, but only 2 husbands, just in case you weren't keeping up. One thing you gotta give Gertrude credit for though is how fucking quickly she moves, because after only 3 weeks of being divorced, again, for a 3rd time, she remarries for a 4th. And this time it was to a 22-year-old man called Dennis Wright. Obviously, that is quite young in comparison to Gertrude, who was older. And Dennis was a bit of a prick himself. He was abusive as well, and he would beat her as well, and he was a piece of shit as well. And it just so happened that Gertrude fell pregnant with this 22-year-old. So he stuck with her through majority of the pregnancy. And then the minute that baby's head popped out of the fucking hoo-ha, he split, he left. He wanted nothing to do with the baby. So now Gertrude, she was in a bit of a pickle because she had a lot of kids and no husband and not a lot of money. So Gertrude, she sued him. She filed a paternity suit and wanted him to pay child support, and she did win, but he didn't have any money to pay, so he didn't pay her anything. So that was all a kerfuffle for nothing, literally nothing. So we'll fast forward a little bit. So Gertrude's daughter, Stephanie, she meets this girl in high school called Sylvia, and they're good friends and they get along well. And so she comes over. This girl's name was Sylvia Likens and she was born in 1949, and her parents worked for the carnival. So they would travel around and like do all the carnival shows and, you know, work with the animals and the stalls and, you know, do all that kind of stuff. So they were away a lot of the time because of this. And because they were away a lot, it did put a lot of strain on the family, and they were really quite a poor family. They didn't have a lot of money, and just the fact that everyone was always moving around, it was just a very difficult family dynamic to be in. But Sylvia, she was a very confident young girl. She was very independent. She made a fair chunk of money for herself by doing odd jobs. She would do babysitting, she would do cleaning, she would do whatever like she could offer someone. Whatever someone was willing to pay for, she would do. Almost everything, but she wasn't allowed work at the carnivals because her parents, they said that the carnivals were no place for like a young girl to work. Her brothers were allowed to travel and work with the carnival, but the girls weren't. So when they would leave, they would have to stay here, and they would have to find like houses, like family or friends or whoever that the girls could actually stay with. So that was really hard on them as well. And then on top of that, the money that she actually did make from doing all her odd jobs, she would usually have to give a huge percentage, if not all of it, to her mum in order to, you know, pay for food and pay for bills and pay for all that stuff, because they just really weren't bringing in money. It was a very collaborative family dynamic when it came to like finances. And because of this, they did often shoplift. And not the kids were sort of taught not to, you know, do anything wrong or do anything like that, but the mum would shoplift if they had to. So Sylvia's mum eventually did get caught for shoplifting, and she was thrown in jail. And this put a lot of pressure on the dad, because now he had these 5 kids that he was like solely in charge of. He had the household that he was solely in charge of, but he also had to still go to work and make sure he was, you know, bringing in money to pay for everything as well. So there was a lot of pressure on him. The reason I'm telling you about Sylvia, because it must sound like a completely different story, the reason I'm telling you about Sylvia is because Sylvia and Stephanie, which was Gertrude's daughter, they become really good friends and they hang out a lot. And Sylvia starts coming over to Stephanie's house a lot and meets all, you know, the siblings, and meets Gertrude and whatever. And she starts sleeping over. And one night, or one morning, I should say, Gertrude meets Sylvia's dad, because the dad comes to pick her up and take her home. And he just sort of starts like ranting about how his wife like isn't around anymore, and it's really hard, and she'll be back soon, but like it's just so hard to look after the 5 kids, and he's got to go away for this carnival. The 3 girls don't have anywhere to go. The older sister, she's alright because she'll find her own way, but these 2 like have got nowhere to put them. And Gertrude's like flirting and like being all cutesy with him, because her whole life she had always like just married someone to take care of her, and she would put up with abuse or whatever, like bad things, whatever baggage came along with it. She just always had someone there to like sort of financially help her, whereas now the only money she was getting was from having her kids, which was not a lot, and it wasn't what she was used to. So she was like, I'll take the girls, I'll take Sylvia and I'll take her sister, and you can just pay me $20 a week and I'll take care of them. I've already got a fucking bunch of kids, so I'm doing it anyway. I may as well get paid for it. So he was like exceptionally grateful. He was just very, very happy and very relieved. It was one thing like off of his plate that he didn't have to worry about. So he was happy. He was like, fucking take them. Not in a nasty way, but he was just so relieved. So now both Sylvia and her sister Jenny had actually suffered from polio when she was younger, so she had like a quite noticeable limp that she did sometimes get bullied for. So Jenny and Sylvia, they move into the household, and it actually goes really, really well at first. They all get along well. Both girls are very independent. Even Jenny, with her limp, she's very independent. They clean up after themselves. They help with the household chores. They cook, they clean. You know, they're used to living in a collaborative effort household. So they're more than happy to come here and like pull their share of the weight of the chores, you know what I mean? So it all went really well at first. But their dad, he was still struggling. He was struggling to make ends meet. He now had to pay for, obviously, like the girls staying there. He was still paying for the brothers. He was still paying for himself. He was still paying for the house. Like it was hard. He was struggling. He wasn't getting in enough money. So he decided that it would be better to use the money he did have to buy dinner for himself and his sons that night, or buy like accommodation for them that night, rather than sending money back for Gertrude, because in his like mindset, he can pay Gertrude later. They're still safe, they've got a place to live, like it's a friend, it's fine. They, on the other hand, needed the food that night because they needed to eat, they needed water, they needed this, they needed that. So that was his sort of line of thinking, was prioritizing where he put his money. He wasn't trying to be a shady guy. So she was like, well, where is it? And when it just kept not showing up, she started to take it out on the girls. One of the first instances of abuse is when she beat the girls with a paddle, and she was like, well, I looked after you bitches for a week for nothing. Like, just completely took it out on them because she wasn't being paid. That's the only reason she wanted them there, was to be paid. So it just wasn't working for her anymore. The parents' actions, obviously by now we know, rub off on kids. And now she had set sort of like a precedent that these two girls, they are below us, they don't matter, they shouldn't overeat, they shouldn't be eating my food because they're not paying me for it anymore. She set this like standard of treat them like shit. I treat them like shit, why shouldn't my kids treat them like shit? And so the kids did start treating them like shit. So Paula, she was the oldest out of all of Gertrude's kids, and she already had a little bit of like a weird thing with Sylvia where she didn't really like her. She was really quite jealous of her. Sylvia was a very pretty girl. She was very attractive, and she was also just very like bubbly and out there, and people tended to be drawn to her and like her and, you know, want to be in her attention. And Paula was pretty ugly. Paula was a bit nasty. Paula didn't get the attention that Sylvia got, and Paula was very jealous about it. So Paula treated her like shit. And she happened to overhear Sylvia telling her sister Jenny how excited she was that she just got this brand new boyfriend, and she's so happy, and like just, you know, telling her sister how happy and excited she was, which is what I just said. And Paula overheard this and just lost it. She was just so jealous and just like seriously hated the thought of her being happy with the boyfriend and just thought it was so unfair. So she just started kicking her and hitting her and abusing her. And Sylvia, she was still independent, she was still confident. It hadn't, you know, entirely broke her spirit. So she still did the right thing. She still kept up with school, she kept her grades up, she still did the chores, she still did the housework, she was still polite, you know. And she continued to do her odd jobs to earn money so that she could, you know, feed herself and buy things for herself and look after herself. And Gertrude didn't like any of that. She would often accuse Sylvia of stealing things and then beat her for it, but in reality, like, Sylvia had actually worked for the money and then gone and bought these things, so it wasn't stolen, but she was being beat for it. But she'd also cop a beating if she ate too much food at home because they weren't paying for it. So if she did go pay for some food and started eating it, she'd still cop a beating because it was stolen. So it was like, if she ate food at all, she would just be beaten. Doesn't, like, it was ridiculous. And then it escalated even more to the point where she wasn't allowed to eat, not even eat, and you'll cop a beating. Like, it just, you do not get food. You don't fucking get food. It's not like mind games. You literally just don't get food. You can have some scraps from the backyard, you can have some scraps from the bin, but you can't eat. And there was actually a lot of situations where the food, like, manipulation over food, it was just weird and gross. Like, there was times where she was forced to eat like an entire hot dog filled with all different condiments, which it's just weird and like sick, and she had to eat all this stuff and then throw it all back up, and then Gertrude forced her to eat the vomit again, which is like, that makes me feel so sick. My stomach is literally turning, you sick fuck, Gertrude. But Sylvia, she was such a smart girl, so she started collecting recyclables from the bins that she had to get the scraps out of so that she could go trade them in to get some money. So she was still hustling to get some fucking money. Obviously, Gertrude didn't fucking like that, and she was caught and punished and abused for it, which started to become quite a pattern. And it wasn't Jenny being abused like this, it was primarily Sylvia. And we don't know why. We don't know why it was only Sylvia and not Jenny, but it was always Sylvia. And then Sylvia started getting punished for spreading rumors about Gertrude's two eldest girls, so Paula and Stephanie. And majority of the time she wasn't spreading any rumors. The girls had a habit of telling everyone like, oh, Sylvia's talking shit about you, Sylvia's saying this about you, Sylvia's doing this behind your back. When she wasn't doing anything, they liked to try and alienate her while she was at school so that she wouldn't have any friends, because she was more popular than them, because she was nicer than them, you know? And they really did. They started to make everybody hate her because everyone thought that she was like talking mad shit about them when really she wasn't. But Gertrude probably knew that it was fake anyway, and she would still punish her for it. But I do know that Sylvia admitted to one of the rumors being true, that she actually did spread it. But I mean, it was for fucking good reason, so like, fuck them. So Stephanie told her boyfriend that Sylvia told everyone that Stephanie and Paula were prostitutes at school, which was true. Not the prostitute part, but the part about Sylvia telling everybody that. She did go around and tell everybody that they were prostitutes. And she did this because they kept telling her that she was a slut and she was a hoe and she was gonna get pregnant, and look at your belly, you're pregnant, and like all this horrible nasty stuff about her sexuality. Especially Gertrude was like hyper fixated on her sexuality and her sex life, and it was super weird, but I'll get into that later. Point is, she spread this rumor about them being prostitutes because she was sick of being called a fucking prostitute, because she wasn't a fucking prostitute, and neither were they. So, and by the way, I'm saying prostitute because it's a quote, not because I'm using the slur, just so it's clear. Oh, and by the way, her sex life was completely like non-existent when she moved in, and Gertrude literally shattered her innocence by asking her all these really intrusive, gross, weird questions that just was so fucking inappropriate. Like, it's not even funny how inappropriate it was. She would give really false like sexual health, not even advice, but just like information, like really false. And then she would ask like about her experience and about like this and that, and it was so bizarre. She had such a like fixation on it. A lot of people summed that up to jealousy as well, but I don't know. So anyway, Stephanie's boyfriend gets really, really mad about this rumor going around about them being prostitutes, because he's like, that's my girlfriend wouldn't do that, like how fucking dare she say that about my girlfriend. Like, he got really pissed off about it. And at school, Stephanie did have a boy actually come up to her and like make a joke and be like, oh, how much for an hour, like, and joked about this rumor, which it's only funny because she's such a fucking cunt. But the boyfriend did not like this, and he felt very embarrassed. So you know what he did? He went home and beat up Sylvia. He bashed Sylvia, the small, fragile little girl, rather than bashing or trying to fight the guy who actually made the joke. Like, that's how much of a coward Stephanie's boyfriend was, that he's gonna go bash the girl and not touch the guy because the guy can hit him back. And then Paula bashed her, and then Stephanie bashed her, and everyone was bashing her, all on different occasions. But like, that is a lot of bashing, that is a lot of beatings, that is a lot of abuse on one person's body. At one point, Paula hit her so fucking hard that she broke her own wrist. She had to go to the doctors or the hospital or whatever, get a cast put on her wrist because she hit her so hard. And then she came home and blamed Sylvia for the fact that her wrist was broken, even though she was the one punching her. Like, hello, if you punch a brick wall and you break your hand, it's your fault, not the wall's, because you punched it, bitch. And then she started using her cast as a weapon to fucking beat her more. Like, what a crazy person. It's like, at this point, it's like, how can it even get any more weird? Like, how can it get any more abusive? But it does. It gets even weirder. The girls, Stephanie and Paula, they start inviting friends over from school to come home to abuse Sylvia. Like, they literally will come over, like, all exciting and like happy to abuse her. Like, how is there that many twisted people in one area? Like, was it a town of psychopaths? I don't get it. How? Why? How? But as bad as that already sounds, it kind of got worse because it turned really, really sadistic and evil. It wasn't just kids like bullying, like being like bullying her like that. It was bad. It was sadistic. It was evil. They would sexually assault her. Gertrude would force her to get naked in front of crowds of school kids or neighborhood kids, either out in the street or in the lounge room, and just humiliate her. They would force her to insert things up there, like purely to humiliate herself. And she had never even had sex. She had never had any sexual encounter at all, and they would force her to do this. Like, what the fuck is wrong with Gertrude? What the fuck is wrong with someone to even, like, why? She would just have bruises all over her, she would have cuts all over her, her down there was mutilated, like it was horrible. She'd have cigarette burns all over her because they would just fucking burn her, like whenever, like it was so disgusting. Obviously by now Gertrude wasn't spending any money on them, she wasn't even feeding them, so Sylvia went and stole a tracksuit from school that she actually needed for school because she couldn't afford it, and Gertrude obviously wasn't going to buy it. And because of this, she actually got forbade from going to school. So now she didn't even get a break from Gertrude, it was all with Gertrude, which I don't know if that's better or worse because she was also being bullied at school, but like I feel like Gertrude was worse. So yeah, she just didn't even get a break now. And eventually the girl's dad did start paying that $20 again, like he did actually catch up, but it was too far gone. Gertrude didn't care anymore. She obviously got some really weird, sadistic, fucked up kick out of hurting Sylvia, so it was what it was. And the family did actually come back to visit on more than one occasion to see the girls, to see Sylvia and Jenny, but they didn't notice anything was wrong. Like, maybe they did go to a great deal of effort of trying to like cover it up, I don't know, but it just seems like crazy, and the girls were too afraid to tell their parents. They didn't want to upset them, which is really sad. Like, if you're ever in that situation, please, for the love of God, tell someone. Like, please just tell them. Someone is always gonna care, even if it's a fucking stranger, like they're gonna care. The closest they ever got to telling like a family member was when they were gonna tell their older sister, but they basically went to her and they were like, we are starving, we are so hungry. They hadn't been being fed, so her sister goes and gets them a sandwich to share. Like, I'm just like, you shit sister. Anyway, anyway, moving on. I talk too much about food when I talk about food. Anyway, one of Gertrude's kids saw them eating the sandwich, which they didn't steal, they didn't take from the house, they didn't do anything wrong. It was literally given to them. They got punished for this, and why I say they, I mean Sylvia. I still don't know why. It was always Sylvia, not Jenny, always fucking Sylvia. Sylvia got thrown into boiling, scalding hot water because she ate a fucking sandwich when she's starving because you don't feed her. Like, what the fuck? So the next time that they saw their older sister, it was like at a park, they kept running into her. They told her, they were like, hey, we're being abused. It's starting to get bad now. And their sister didn't believe it, which is just fucking unbelievable. Only one person in this entire time of abuse saw Sylvia's body and the marks on her body and thought, hey, that's a red fucking flag. Like, that's a red flag for abuse. I know that she's living over at Gertrude's house. I should fucking call the police. And so they did. Thank God. Thank you to that one sane person in that whole town of fucking psychos, because what the fuck? And so the police, actually it wasn't the police, sorry, I misspoke. It was a nurse that went and did like a welfare check, I guess. And they checked up on all the kids, not just Sylvia, but like obviously they noticed Sylvia did have like bruises and, you know, whatever, marks on her, and Gertrude just talked her way out of it, made it seem like everything's fine. The kids all like agreed because obviously they're in on it, the fucking little psycho people, and yeah, just literally talked their way out of it. Her excuse was that Sylvia was a rotten, bratty, unpleasant, like snotty little shit of a kid, and that she like was horrible. She didn't do what she was told, she didn't like listen to any of the rules, and that she had all these marks on her because she just had really bad hygiene. Like, if you go to a house that you're called to for like an incident of child abuse, and the mother starts being like, she's a rotten brat, she's this, she's that, she's... How could you walk away from that and be like, yeah, it's a happy, safe environment? Like, what do you mean? After this, Gertrude was just like a mega bitch, fucking 10 times worse. Her punishments got worse, her attitude got worse. She was like just a big abusive grump. Now she made Sylvia spend time in the basement all alone, and she started chaining her up. She also would make her, like, she was naked. Like, she made her be chained. That just doesn't make sense how I'm saying it. Not only was she chained up in the basement, alone, freezing cold, she was also naked, alone in the basement, freezing cold. And at this stage in Sylvia's life, she had become incontinent because as I said, Gertrude had such a sick fascination with like her sexual organs and like having some form of sexual abuse. She would always kick her in the vagina, like, and the stomach, and they would always kick her in like her female organ area. Do you know what I mean? And she got to the point where she was incontinent. She literally could not help it, and she's fucking chained up, so there's nothing she can do. So now she's just shitting and pissing all over herself. Gertrude knew that she was incontinent. Like, there was no hiding the fact that she was incontinent, and when she would poo or wee all over herself, Gertrude would still get mad. And it's like, but you're the reason that she's fucking, And then she would get thrown into scalding water again. On top of that, Gertrude, she didn't want them fucking neighborhood kids to miss out on all the fun now that she was in the basement. So she started charging admission. She started charging 50 cents per neighborhood kid to come in and abuse her more, as if she hadn't had enough. And this is what I mean, like a literal town of psychopaths. Like, if you saw that your neighbor was like, hey, come pay 50 cents to beat up a girl, would you be like, yeah, sure? Like, what the fuck? There was this one boy in particular, his name was Richard, and he would come over all the time. He was one of the neighborhood kids. So he would frequently come to abuse her, and one day he got there while Gertrude was carving out writing, like letters, into Sylvia's stomach, which, just a side note, in my book, Believe Me Not, I wrote about that happening to a girl in a much less scary situation, but I just think that's fucking, like, am I feeling okay that I had that same idea? Anyway, moving on. Gertrude decided she didn't want to finish writing out this carving, which it was supposed to say, I'm a prostitute and proud. Again, with the weird, like, sexual thing, I don't know. Basically, she got halfway through, gave up, and she was like, here, Richard, you fucking do it. So Richard went and finished the carving. And then later that night, Gertrude got everyone gathered around and she stripped her down naked and she like showed off her new carving. And she made up some stupid fucking story about how she ran off to some sex party and that's why she has it. And like, it's just like, you are so weird. You are so fucking weird. And all these neighborhood kids who would pay admission, they would beat her, hit her, kick her, slap her, cut her, burn her, just absolutely everything and anything that they could, they would. And Gertrude would either like oversee what was happening or she would join in, and she would even grab a knife and go up to Sylvia and like cut her and then be like, fight back, come on bitch, fight back. And it's like, she's fucking chained up naked on the wall, she hasn't eaten, she's malnourished, like that's how twisted you are that you like. And then when she did cut her, she'd have the kids rub salt into her wounds. Gertrude even got her young son, who was 12 years old, to join in on the fun, and he would rub shit from a nappy into Sylvia's face and like force it into her mouth. And at this point, Gertrude just kind of got over it. Like, it was like she was bored. So at this point, she just kind of started concocting a plan to take her to the forest and like dump her there and either have her die or have her like wander around. Like she just didn't want her anymore, she just didn't care. So she forced Sylvia to write a letter to her parents and basically say, I'm running away with these boys and my body's all fucked up like this from all these fucking scars and fucking burn marks and whatever else. Because the boys did it to me and they raped me and I'm running away with them. That's why I'm gone. So now Gertrude felt like she had covered her ass. Like, if Sylvia was found dead, then it's like, oh, well, the boys must have done it. Like, it wasn't Gertrude. And Gertrude wanted the help of her kids. So she actually told her kids and they were going to help her carry out this plan to get rid of her. But Sylvia overheard this plan, and later that night when Jenny came to see her, she was like, Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm gonna die. Like, I'm gonna die. And then later that next day, Sylvia tried to make a run for it. She tried to escape and she ran off, but at this point she was so malnourished, she was so weak, she was so bruised and battered and broken. Like, she just couldn't. So Gertrude caught her and she ended up shoving like dry toast down her throat to, you know, give her some sort of food because at this point she was gone. But because she was so dehydrated, she couldn't even stomach the toast, so she literally was just gagging, throwing it all up, like it wouldn't stay down. And because of this, Gertrude beat her even more, even though it was her fault, and it knocked her unconscious. So now she was like, oh great, we'll put her back in the basement. So they dragged her back to the fucking basement and left her in there again. When Sylvia woke up, she knew she was going to die, so she started screaming and banging on the walls and kicking and yelling and crying out, like just being as loud as possible as she could, screaming for help. And one of the neighbors actually did fucking hear her, but they just kind of kept listening out, and eventually the noise stopped. So they said that they didn't bother calling the police because they were like, oh, they must have just been playing or something. Like, oh my god, bro, really? And then the following day, Sylvia was in a really, really, really bad state. She couldn't walk, she couldn't hold herself up. She was suffering from memory loss to the point where she actually looked at Gertrude and was like, are you Gertie? And this obviously, that pissed the witch off, so she started yelling and screaming and whatever. And then Sylvia, she shit herself again, and she was ordered to clean it up, but she literally physically couldn't. Like, she was not all there. She had just been beaten to the point where, like, she was so delirious, she was just gone. And so she ordered her 12-year-old son John to hose her down and get the shit off her. As he's doing this, she went to make a run for it again, because she knows she's gonna fucking die. She's gone, but she's there, you know what I mean? She knew she was gonna fucking die. So she started trying to go up the stairs, and Gertrude basically met her at the top of the stairs to stop her. So once they meet up the top, Gertrude pushes her back, which forces her to fall on the stairs, and then Gertrude stomps on her head. It's at this point that she stomps on her temple and fucking kills her. Normally I'm not this like emotional when I'm telling these stories. Like, I get angry, but I don't get this angry, whereas now I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna sound like such a psycho bitch because I'm so personally offended by this story. Anyway, it was at this point that Stephanie decided she would give Sylvia a hot, warm, soapy bath, because she could tell, like, she was unconscious and something was wrong, and she, for whatever reason, thought that a hot, soapy, warm bath would wake her up and make her feel better. So she starts trying to soap her up or whatever, and it's not working because she's fucking dead. She's fucking dead, babe, she's dead. And not even halfway through, like, filling the bathtub up and like doing all this, she realizes that she's dead, and she just starts sobbing and whining and howling and hugging her and like losing it. Like, Stephanie's losing it. Stephanie actually tries to give her mouth to mouth. She tries to resuscitate her, all while Gertrude's running around yelling, fucking screaming, it's a hoax, it's a hoax, she's faking it, she's not really dead. Like, fuck me, she's a good actor then, eh? Shortly after this though, Gertrude finally realized that yes, she actually really was dead. By the way, Sylvia Likens was 16 years old when Gertrude decided to murder her by stomping on her head. And at this point, she orders Stephanie and her boyfriend to go and call the police from a payphone, but Stephanie is still holding onto her body, crying and sobbing. But the boyfriend, he did what he was told, and he went and called the police from a payphone, and the police show up. And then Gertrude plays innocent again, and she's like, oh, she just rocked up here and then fell down there like that, and like, I don't know what happened. And at this point, Jenny, Sylvia's actual sister, she pulls one of the policemen aside and she whispers to them, get me out of here, I will tell you everything. Thank God they took it seriously, and they took her out of there, and she confessed everything, all of the abuse, all of the different instances, because she was there for the majority of Sylvia's abuse, which is horrible. So now Gertrude was arrested. Paula, who was eldest, she was arrested. She was 17 years old. Stephanie and her boyfriend were also arrested, as well as John, who was 12, as well as the neighborhood kid Richard, who was 14. Then more of the neighborhood kids who were, you know, involved, they were arrested as well. Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Cisco, they were all charged with causing an injury to a person before being released to their parents and being used as witnesses in the trial. So they did an autopsy of Sylvia, and it's absolutely horrible what they found. There was like over 150 wounds to her body, which is intense. All of her fingernails and toenails had been like pushed and bent backwards. All of the skin around her like breasts and her legs and her arms, it had all like receded, and her vaginal canal had been so battered and damaged that it was so swollen that it was almost like swollen shut. So Gertrude, Paula and John, they were all trialed for first-degree murder, but Stephanie, she got off of all of her charges because she agreed to testify against her entire family, and she was her charges were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. And then Richard, the neighborhood kid, as well as Stephanie's boyfriend, whose name was Coy, they were tried for premeditated malice. But Richard and Coy, their charges were upped from premeditated malice to manslaughter. And then John, his charges were dropped and lowered from first-degree murder to manslaughter. So those three ended up with manslaughter. So Coy and John, they were actually given 18 months in a juvenile facility. And Richard, he was sent to a juvenile facility as well. But they say that he was so overwhelmed by the crime that he committed that he was so badly affected that he was driven to chain smoking, and then he died at 21 of lung cancer. So Paula and Gertrude, they both originally were trialed for first-degree murder, but Paula was granted a retrial and her charges were dropped to voluntary manslaughter. So she was given 2 to 21 years. Guess how many years she served? She served 3 years. 3 years. Gertrude also had a retrial, but she was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison. But in prison, she was a model inmate and everybody loved her, and she was like the little mother duckling, even though she can't be a mother in the real world. And she was released early on parole. This is when she changed her name to Nadine Van Vossen, which is quite an interesting name actually, but fuck you, Nadine. And then moved to Iowa, and then when Paula was released, she ran to Iowa to be with her mummy as well. Paula, who abused the fuck out of Amona, she became a teacher. This is the Barbie and Ken killers fucking all over again. She became a teacher, teaching minors. Enough is a fucking enough with all of these despicable, criminal, insane, evil, rapist, child murder fucking people becoming teachers and having normal jobs, no teaching jobs, no medical jobs, no doctors, no in the government, no job where you have control over any person. No, more, go away. Like, what the fuck? You know what else? No ministering either, because John, the little psycho 12-year-old, he became a minister. He also changed his name to John Blake, so he obviously liked the name John. Anyway, that's pretty much the story of Sylvia Likens and Gertrude Van Vossen, or whatever the fuck you want to call the witch. There is a lot more information about what happened inside the house while they were abusing her. There's a lot of different stories, a lot of different instances of abuse. But this video is already way too fucking long, and I've been doing this a lot lately, so I need to chill. Yeah, that's pretty much the story. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I'd love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you let me know what you think about this one in the comments down below. I'm sure you've heard about this story before, but any feedback would be appreciated. I hope someone's as angry as I am, because I don't normally get this emotional, and I'm literally like, ooh, bro. So I hope someone else feels the same way, you know? Misery loves company and all that. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Make sure you don't follow in your psychopathic, crazy, bitch-ass mother's footsteps, because it's a bad idea. Make sure you never pay admission to abuse people. Don't do it for free either. And most importantly, make sure you never leave your kids with weird, old, strange, ugly ladies for long periods of time, because bad things happen. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be safe. Bye.